Okay, hi everyone. This is the first of two lectures which are going to get put together for your July 12th lecture. That might sound a little confusing, but basically in a typical class, what we're going to go over today would be covered in two separate full-length lectures. So this is part one, and this is what we're going to talk about right now are social process theories. And the reason why I was able to record this one for you guys as opposed to using last semester's lecture is I actually didn't have this one recorded yet. So what you're going to hear right now is me having recorded this the day before we were supposed to hear it, July 11th. The next folder, when you click on for part two, is actually that part of the lecture that was recorded several months ago. So just to make you aware of the context of what you're hearing. So the social process theories that we've already started talking about in this class had to do with strain and anomie and subcultural theories. And we're going to keep talking about some different social process theories today. So as just kind of a review, what these social process theories are. The idea behind social process theories is that their emphasis is that crime is something that you either learned or is culturally transmitted. It's a social phenomenon. So crime in a lot of these theories, one of the kind of common themes is in some way crime is a product of a person's social environment. But that's, that point is really one of the few places where these theories tend to agree. After that, they really differ on exactly how it is that this happens. So, as a basis, yes, crime is primarily driven by your environment and your upbringing and your influences, but beyond that, the theories really diverge. So in this first part, we're going to talk about social disorganization, differential association, and social learning theories. So those are three kind of separate theories. The two bottom theories, differential association theory and social learning theory, are really very similar. In fact, social learning theory is kind of the updated version of differential association theory. But we'll talk about each of them and how they've kind of evolved in criminology. Whenever you're talking about social process theories in criminology, you have to go back to the mid-20th century, to the University of Chicago, because within the sociology and various other departments within the University of Chicago, really some of the most famous people in criminology were writing and influencing each other and reading each other and developing some of the classic theories of criminology. So a lot of people that we'll talk about today, they either came out of the Chicago school or they were, graduate students, mentees of people that were, initially in the school and then went on to do very big things. So whenever you hear about people talking about the Chicago school in criminology, that what you're talking about there is the real heart of a sociological look at criminology, a real intense look at social process in criminology. And all of these theories, well, especially the ones that we'll talk about first, have a little bit of a basis in the ideas from human ecology. Some of the early scholars in social process theories really based a lot of their ideas on human ecological ideas. So that word ecology, when you're talking about plant life and animal life other than humans, and you're talking about their ecology, you're talking about how they interact with the environment, how plants interact with each other and form kind of an ecosystem. So human ecology is studying how humans come together as communities and interact with their environment. So human ecology was something that people got interested in it in the mid-20th century. As urban centers grew bigger and bigger, there was a lot more interest in trying to understand, how is it that we live in cities? What does living in cities do to us? And how do communities form and continue after they've developed in a city? So human ecologists back in the Chicago school really saw urban cities as kind of an organism. They saw these areas as, growing things that have features, that have, permanent kind of aspects of them. And They described how it is that groups of people come into these areas in a session of events that they called invasion, dominance, and succession. The idea being, in most U.S. cities, we see this kind of gradual pattern over time where new groups of people will kind of invade and move into an area, invasion. They'll live there for a while, dominance, and eventually they'll move on. They'll either find a better place to live, or they'll just move to a different part of the city. They'll find different resources to utilize, and then a new group will come and invade in. So human ecologists at the time were using the city of Chicago as kind of a basis for this and studying how, especially in the early 20th century, incoming immigrant groups, people were flocking into particular areas of the city, but there was this kind of constant turnover, constant cycle of events. So two human ecologists who really talked about this and explained it more carefully were two people called Park and Burgess. And Burgess in particular was famous for creating this model of Chicago neighborhoods where he described how Chicago neighborhoods and how cities really, like Chicago, will develop. Again, this isn't a theory of crime yet. I want you to understand that. All that he was talking about, what he was interested in, was talking about urban development. So this picture that I have on the slide is taken right out of your textbook, or one very like it is in your textbook. And what Burgess showed is that most cities develop from kind of a central business district right in the heart of the city, and then they kind of radiate out. And what he described are these zones where people live. So in that second zone, he called that the transitional zone, because according to him, the people that have to live there tend to be very poor. They tend to have to work in the central business district, which back then were the factories. And so people in this transitional home were always in a state of influx. They only were living there because they had to. It was very dilapidated, deteriorated housing. A lot of the people that were there were of very different racial, ethnic backgrounds, and as soon as they could get out, they would. So according to him, after this transitional zone, which some people call the zone in transition, every kind of zone after that, the living conditions got a little bit nicer and nicer. So after this transitional zone, you have kind of working class zones. And Burgess described these as being tenements, apartment buildings, maybe row houses, things like that have been divided up into multiple family units. Then you get a zone outside that, and he described what he called the residential zone. This is, the suburbs, essentially. Well, maybe one tick before the suburbs. Single-family homes, still not a lot of space, but much more living area for each person. The conditions are better here. And then the commuter zone, which is what he really talked about as the suburbs. So basically, in criminology, what we've been very interested in is studying this transitional zone, because this tended to be the area which criminologists realized was producing a great deal of the problems within these urban cities back in the mid-20th century. So again, Burgess isn't necessarily a criminologist, but other people within the University of Chicago took this idea that there are these zones of living and of development, and applied a theory of crime to them. After Burgess wrote about his ecological ideas about human and urban development, two criminologists then took those ideas and applied them to the study of crime. So the two people that are most famous for doing this back in the Chicago school were two men by the name of Clifford Shaw and Henry McKay. And basically, they observed in Chicago that over a period of time, this zone in transition, zone 2, always had the highest crime. And they did this in a really simple way. They basically laid this urban development map over the city of Chicago, and with, thumbtacks back at the time, this is very technologically advanced research, they literally just put thumbtacks in the map of Chicago every time a crime incident happened, where the incident occurred over several years. And that's how they kind of came to realize this pattern was occurring, that no matter who lived in the zone, zone 2 always had the highest level of crime. And they attributed this to this concept, this idea that they called social disorganization. So for them, that phrase means when a neighborhood is unable to realize common values, or solve community problems. Disorganized neighborhoods, not only can they not do anything about problems that arise, but they don't even really have an agreement and understanding within each other about what is and is not okay to do within their community. So there's no networks, there's no structure, there's no communication between people. And because of that, they become this kind of socially disorganized community. One thing that Sean Mackay had to talk about in this theory was, okay, if you've defined this concept, social disorganization, what causes that? What makes a neighborhood become socially disorganized? And for Sean Mackay, that was 3 basic things. The first one was communities who have a population that is very heterogeneous. And what they meant by that is a population made up of people from a variety of different backgrounds, speaking different languages, having different customs. Back in early 20th century Chicago, when immigrants from all over Western Europe and beyond were moving into this country and, clustering together in communities, if a lot of them came into this zone in transition, they weren't going to be able to be very organized. So population heterogeneity for them was a big reason why disorganization happens. Another reason that they talked about for what causes social disorganization is poverty. For them, neighborhoods that are in constant disadvantage and constant struggle are going to be in a state of disorganization. And the third thing that they talked about in terms of the causes of social disorganization are high levels of instability or population mobility. In other words, in this zone in transition, people didn't stay for very long. There weren't a lot of people who came in and bought houses, bought things and tried to improve them or, resided in them for more than 1 or 2 years. Most people who moved into this zone got out as soon as they could. As soon as they could afford to live somewhere better, they did. According to Sean Mackay, all those 3 reasons, population heterogeneity, poverty, and population mobility, were really the 3 main causal factors as to why a community would become socially disorganized. So this theory, social disorganization, is a theory about informal social control. The theory is saying that neighborhoods need to control each other. They need to control the people within them. And a neighborhood's ability to do that, a neighborhood's ability to control the behavior of the members of their community is what's going to keep it low in crime. If you're within a neighborhood where there are general understandings and expectations about what's okay to do and what's going to happen if a problem arises, that's a neighborhood that you can say has high informal social control. People are keeping an eye out on the streets. If someone's kid gets into trouble or is seen doing something wrong, that kid's parent is going to hear about it. Communities that are like that, you would say, have high informal social control. And all that we mean by informal is, if you think about formal social control as the police, that's a formal control agent. Informal is everybody else who can still kind of exert authority and have a stake in what's going on. So this theory is all about informal social control, because in socially disorganized neighborhoods, there is no control. They can't control, specifically, they were talking about youths. And for them, socially disorganized neighborhoods are a problem because in those neighborhoods, there is a breakdown in this kind of informal social control. So in all of these theories of crime that we've talked about, there's some kind of an assumption about human nature. Why do we do things? Why do we commit crime at all? And in this theory, because it's a control theory, the assumption is that we need to be controlled from committing crime. All of us are in some way controlled by societal influences, and that protects us and keeps us from committing crime. It's only when you're freed from those controls that you think that committing crime is okay. So in these kind of communities, Sean Mackay's argument is, over time, there's been such a breakdown in the control in these communities that youths don't really care anymore about the consequences of their actions. They don't feel attached to the neighborhood or to the people within it or to the values of society anymore. They're freed from those things. They're free to commit crime. That's kind of the assumption that this theory is presenting.